36-page order, those cornerstones that he claimed or asserted were not met. Section 12, 406, clearly there's no invasion, there's no rebellion. It's absurd. And so we're gratified. Today is a big day for the Constitution of the United States, for our democracy, and I hope it's the beginning of a new day in this country where we push back against overreach, we push back against these authoritarian tendencies of a president that has pushed the boundaries, pushed the limit, but no longer can push this state around any longer. Happy to take any questions. Well, I hope we look at what happened to Senator Padilla not through the blue or red lens, but through your own set of eyes, and just tell me that that's right. Here's a United States Senator in his home state, in a federal building, in his office building, that wishes to join a press conference, not dissimilar to this, and express himself by simply asking a question, and was handcuffed, was thrown down to the ground, a United States Senator. And anyone that knows Alex Padilla knows one thing about Alex Padilla. He's one of the most mild-mannered, decent people you'll meet. And that's not, don't just take my word for it. Folks on the other side of the aisle would acknowledge that. I thought it was a disgrace. I want to make this clear. The National Guard will come back under my authority by noon tomorrow. The National Guard will be redeployed to what they were doing before Donald Trump commandeered them. The National Guard will go back to border security, working on counter-drug enforcement and fentanyl enforcement, which they were taken off by Donald Trump. The National Guard will go back to working on what we refer to as the rattlesnake teams, doing vegetation and forest management, which Donald Trump took them off in preparation for wildfire season. The National Guard, men and women, will go back to their day jobs, which include law enforcement, that he took them off the job. Just want you to all absorb what I just said. By the way, you don't have to absorb it. You'll have an opportunity to review that in the 36-page order from Justice Breyer that laid that out. And they'll come back under the rightful command of the governor of the state of California.
Governor, what about the president will honor those orders? Plan to demonstrate on Saturday in response to this military event?
Do it peacefully. It's a vulgar display. It's the kind of thing you see Kim Jong-un, you see it Putin, you see it with dictators around the world that are weak and just want to demonstrate strength. Weakness masquerading as strength. To fet the dear leader on his birthday, what an embarrassment. Honestly, that's about as small as it gets. How weak do you have to be to commandeer the military to fet you on your birthday in a vulgar display of weakness? That's Donald Trump.
Governor, you warned other states in your address the other night. What are the messages and conversations you've been having with those blue state leaders?
Well, these governors have all been waiting for this decision. I haven't had a chance to talk to any governors. And by the way, every Republican governor. I remember one of them by the name of Newsom, who just a few months ago was on there with one of the spokespeople for the Trump administration, Sean Hannity, and was going on and on and on about a rumor that somehow former President Biden was going to federalize her national troop. And she stood there talking about freedom and federalism, the 10th Amendment. And here she is, her folks throwing the United States Senator from the great state of California on the ground and handcuffing him in his office building in 2025.
Governor, what about the Marines? Were you disappointed that Judge Breyer didn't address that issue? Is that something that you expected to develop?
Well, there's been a lot of rhetoric from Pete Hegseth, that's his name, that they've quote-unquote been deployed, but it doesn't appear they have been. But they were making you believe that. And so I think the judge was waiting for the evidence that they actually had been deployed into Los Angeles, which they appear not to be. Of course, they're not coordinating with anybody on this. So he's just waiting for that evidence. Obviously, they moved to another location for training exercises. But here's the bottom line. The police do policing. Military, it's for the battlefield. The idea that these unbelievably brave young men and women that I work with, that we have had the benefit of their extraordinary contribution all across this state. I gave you 3 examples. What more evidence do we need of the work they did during the wildfires in Los Angeles and all the work they did to secure locations and keep property and personal lives safe over the course of the last few months? These folks are now being commandeered to do ICE raids. You've seen the photographs. That ends tomorrow at noon. And the notion that the United States active duty Marines, these heroes, would be used to militarize the streets of an American city is an abomination. Founding fathers did not live and die to see that happen in this country for no reason whatsoever than vanity, theater, to instill fear, to incite a response. So I'm very hopeful this order puts that in perspective, and hopefully Donald Trump will immediately back down. The courts have ruled on the guard. They will be back under my command, and he'll be relieved. Donald Trump will be relieved of his command at noon tomorrow.
On that note, are you confident that the President and Secretary Hegseth will honor this order? And then you've also mentioned that you would try to work with the President in the past.
Of course.
Has this situation changed your dynamic with the
No,
President?
because I will work with anyone to advance the interests of 40 million Americans that I happen to represent here in California. And so I've always maintained an open hand, not a closed fist. But I also am going to stand firm and tall and push back against lawlessness, against someone that does not believe in the rule of law, does not believe in constraints, does not believe in the Constitution, who is threatening judges, that threatens not to abide by orders, and Donald Trump better abide by these orders, or we have a constitutional crisis, likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetime. Well, that will be determined by fate and future, but also fundamentally by whatever decision he makes. That's how things break down. It's a federal judge with a federal order. Period, full stop. It's the rule of law. These are the foundational principles of a constitutional democracy. He must work under the constraints as a constitutional officer of the Constitution of the United States of America. That's what this court order demands of the President of the United States. He is not a monarch, he is not a king, and he should stop acting like one.
Governor, when's the last time you spoke to the President?
I spoke to him on Friday night. He had a mysterious conversation with me 3 days later. You can't even make this stuff up.
Attorneys for the government seem to
Read out that conversation. Do you have a readout?
Oh, I would love to share the readout, but I revere the office of presidency, so I'll keep it in confidence. He has quite literally made up components of that conversation. He's been a stone-cold liar about what he said we talked about. He never discussed the National Guard, period, full stop. I would love to share with you what he actually talked about. That would send shivers up your spine.
Attorneys for the government, though, today seem to imply that that Friday call, that you might have been aware that this was coming, or can you confirm whether or not you knew that this was coming, this order was coming?
Of course not. Yeah, no, absolutely not. We were back and forth with Susie Wiles as chief of staff, and then mayor of Los Angeles. Saw a missed call from the president, called him back. I actually texted him back. You want full disclosure? And he called me right back. We discussed for a nanosecond Los Angeles, and he immediately zigged and zagged into 7 or 8 other topics, some extraordinarily familiar and some extraordinarily remarkable, considering the world we're living in.
So how did you find out?
I learned about it when I saw some tweet about Governor Newsom, a nickname, by the way, that's hardly original. There was an 8th grader on Baltimore Street in Corte Madera that used to call me that. And the reference to the National Guard being commandeered in that same tweet. That's how I learned about it.
Governor, are you confident this ruling will stand on appeal, especially if it gets to the Supreme Court?
Well, I'm confident in the rule of law. I'm confident in the Constitution of the United States. I'm confident in the wisdom and judgment of a very well-respected federal judge, and I'm confident on the basis of the review of the 36 pages, absolutely, it will stand.
Governor, does this order go even further than you expected? I think your attorneys had asked for them to simply be restricted to federal buildings.
I'll just say we're extraordinarily pleased by the 36-page ruling of Justice Breyer.
Can you speak to some of the journalists who have been, about some of the journalists in LA who have been hit with rubber bullets or?
Well, there's 2 investigations. The one we initiated with the California Highway Patrol, and there's one that has been initiated independent by the LAPD. And people should feel safe. Reporters absolutely should feel safe. And we'll get to the bottom of it. I don't want to prejudge, but I'm concerned about them. That's why we advanced the investigations.
Governor, today in San Francisco, immigration attorneys tell us that there were 3 additional folks who were detained while heading into the ICE court offices on Sansom. This is some of just many detentions we've seen at courthouses and immigration offices in the Bay Area around the state. And many of these people, their attorneys are telling us they have complicated technical cases. What are your thoughts about seeing these detentions occurring in your communities around California?
Well, he's on, let's just dispense. This is not about criminals. If it's about criminals, got no beef with me. We want to secure our border. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need a pathway to citizenship for people being here 10, 15, 20 years, contributing, paying their taxes, being remarkable members of our community. But that's not what this is about. I was in Oxnard, California, and Ventura County yesterday, met with 3 people directly impacted by indiscriminate raids. I met a 12-year-old boy in 6th grade, weeping, crying, tears pouring down his face. His mother and father were both detained. They disappeared. He has no brothers, no sisters, no family. He quite literally is on his own, abandoned. That's Donald Trump's America. 20+ years his mom and dad working in the same fields, doing the same packing and shipping. 20+ years. They've disappeared. 12-year-old boy. You saw the images of ICE officers running through strawberry fields, CBP helicopters above. I met a woman, a single mother, who was walking out at 5:45 a.m. to get in her car. 7 agents surrounded her. They took her in a car, in essence kidnapping her, driving her around for almost 2 hours until she finally convinced the agent, because she has 3 young children, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 8-year-old, that they needed to get to school, and there's no one to help them get to school. She was finally allowed to call her oldest daughter, who was interrogated by the agent and threatened. And they threatened her after they dropped her off, said, "We may be back," terrorizing this single mother. No criminal record, no criminal background. I met another young woman whose husband has quite literally disappeared. No criminal record. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't even know what happened. That was just yesterday. That's Donald Trump's America. Agricultural workers. Think about that when you have dinner tonight. Think about when you enjoy your first course. Have some fresh fruit, some fresh vegetables. Who provided those? Who supported you in that? Think about it when you go home and the construction around your property. Or maybe you're getting a remodel. Who's doing that work? Destroying not only the foundations of our democracy, the best, again, of the Roman Republic and Greek democracy, but now our economy is at risk because of the recklessness and the cruelty of Donald Trump, the indiscriminate cruelty of Donald Trump. Why else do you go to a 7-Eleven? Why else do you go to a nail salon? Why else do you just randomly show up in front of a hardware store? Why else? It's not about criminals. That's about creating chaos. And I do not believe the American people, the majority of the American people, support that. Quite the contrary. And so this decision was important because it's about constraints, it's about limits, it's about our democracy. And that's why we're very grateful by the order.
Thank you,
Plan if President Trump does not abide by this order?
Well, I think the courts will. I think that's, look, I'm counting on these separations of power. It's the co-equal branches of government. Co-equal, Mr. President, branches of government. He's eliminated one, or they eliminated themselves. That's called Congress. Speaker Johnson, who his eloquence was elevated when he called to, quote unquote, tar and feather the governor of California. That's the speaker. Very religious man. I guess that's the spirit. The word, the Lord. He's abdicated any oversight and responsibility over the President of the United States. There's one branch remaining, and that's the judicial branch. So my response to you is we count on the judicial branch. But there's also, as I said, I ended that speech 48 hours ago, I said there's the most important office, and that's office of citizen. That's all of you. Stepping up, stepping in, and sharing your passion with action. Pushing back against this peacefully, and sharing your voice. And I think this weekend there will be millions and millions of Americans rightfully expressing their outrage, their constitutionally protected right to assemble and free speech, peacefully expressing that all across this country. I pray that's the case.
You don't want to talk about the conversation you had with the president, but are there any details that you can tell us?
No, not at this moment.
Governor, what do you make of the president today coming out and saying he wants to protect California farm workers from deportation, given what you...
This is what he does. He creates a problem, and then he tries to be a hero in his own Marvel movie. Did it on fill in a blank on almost every topic. Creates the problem, and then tries to do a make-believe as if you're all perfect little sheep, and you're going to go on with it to be the hero in his own Marvel movie. He initiated those raids. He significantly increased the scale and scope of those raids. That's why he wants the National Guard. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guardsmen and women now being dispersed everywhere, sprinter vans, unmarked, people with masks, running in, rolling over, some case running into cars, 6-month-old kid, a 3-year-old child in the back of the car, left. So, spare me, Mr. President, that he's sincere on that. But if he is, that happened because of you. It happened because of the American people, because they stood up. And that should give us some optimism. Thank you all very, very much.
You have been following this address by Governor Newsom just now. We are beginning the NBC4 News at 7, I guess a little bit early here. This all stems, Kathy, from the decision by the federal judge today. He has blocked the Trump administration from deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles. That decision, though, was stayed until noon tomorrow, our time. The Trump administration already appealing this.
Yeah, it was stayed until noon tomorrow, so it would give the Trump administration time to go in and appeal. That has already happened. Right now, we're joined by our legal analyst, Royal Oakes, to give us some legal insight into all of this. Royal, if now that they've appealed, what happens next?
Well, Kathy and Carolyn, the next step is tomorrow at noon. Trump has to go to the Ninth Circuit and say, I'm appealing this decision. And that's why the judge stayed, put on the shelf this order until noon tomorrow. Now, who knows if the Ninth Circuit is going to want to help Donald Trump, but that's the very next step. And as you've reported, what's happening next week is there's going to be another hearing a week from tomorrow, Friday of next week, as to whether to make this ruling the judge made today permanent through a trial a year or two down the road. So Trump will be able to file a brief next week. The Newsom administration will be filing a brief next week. But the immediate action is going to be in the Ninth Circuit tomorrow to see whether they will put this ruling on the shelf.
Okay, so just moments ago, Royal, we know that the Trump administration did in fact appeal. So it's now before the Ninth Circuit, and they can choose to hear it, to not hear it, to stay this once again. I mean, I assume that's what the Trump administration is hoping for. Could that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Any of those things could happen, Carolyn. The main thing to take away from what happened today, though, is this was a clean sweep victory for Gavin Newsom on all of the issues. The first question was whether what's going on in Los Angeles is really a rebellion, and this judge rejected it. He said a rebellion has to be violent and armed and organized, and he said this simply was not that. The second issue was whether Trump blew it by not asking for Governor Newsom's approval. This judge said that I'm not even going to get to the point as to whether Newsom has a right to veto the request to federalize National Guard troops. The fact is, the judge concluded today in his 36-page opinion, Trump didn't even ask. And because of that, he lost on that ground. And the final issue that the judge ruled against the Trump administration on is that the military, and they're not supposed to do the work of police officers. So he embraced this notion that has been a part of American history. We don't want the Army to go in when the police should be doing this. So, yeah, the action will move to the Ninth Circuit now. And, of course, most of the judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals have been appointed by Democrat presidents. And so Donald Trump probably can't be too optimistic that they're going to flip this ruling that happened today.
So all of this is tied up in the courts. We heard the governor say noon tomorrow, the National Guard comes back under my control. So what does happen at noon tomorrow with the National Guard?
Well, at noon tomorrow, unless the Ninth Circuit gives good news to Donald Trump, they could theoretically say, well, I'm not going to finalize or approve this order yet. But probably what will happen is that at noon, the control of the National Guard will return to Governor Newsom, and he obviously will be free to do what we know he will do, which is stop the activity that Donald Trump started and implemented, and then he'll be free to use the National Guard as he wishes, but it won't be under Trump's control. It'll be back under Newsom's control.
It is a bit, I mean, this is so unusual. We've never really experienced anything like this, and we've already heard Pete Hegseth saying, you know, perhaps he will not be abiding by this, although I don't know how Pete Hegseth could get involved with the National Guard, but certainly Pete Hegseth can control Marine operations, I would imagine.
So that's the scary part about this. And of course, for the last couple of months, we've been talking about the possibility of a constitutional crisis. In other words, where a federal court says you do X and somebody in the Trump administration says, no, we're not going to do that. They don't say, oh, well, we're going to appeal and then we'll abide by it if the U.S. Supreme Court says we lose. Instead, the question is, will they at any point ignore a federal court order? Now, for Hegseth to say something along the lines of, well, I'm not sure if a single federal judge has the power to dictate foreign policy and national security issues to Donald Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to spit in the eye of this order and ignore it and defy it, even if the courts say, absolutely, you must abide by it. You know, it gets back to that old historical thing we've talked about Andrew Jackson, the president of the 1800s, saying to a chief justice, well, you've made your ruling, now you enforce it. Because the court doesn't have a standing army, whereas Jackson does have that. So we're not to that point, but the comments by Hegseth certainly do raise some concerns and make people nervous as to whether we're creeping toward this constitutional crisis.
And Royal, we always bring you in when we're trying to understand something. Have you ever seen anything on this level, or what do you compare it to, if anything?
Nope. This is very weird. You know, back in the day in the 50s, when the southern states refused to desegregate schools, President Eisenhower sent in the National Guard, even though the southern governors didn't want him to go in. And then in the 60s, the Selma, Alabama civil rights movement, you had some nationalization of troops. But we've never really seen such a partisan clash between the president and the local authorities as we've seen in this case. And of course, obviously, it comes at a time where partisanship is a real problem in this country. Yeah, we're in uncharted territory, Kathy, and we just hope that it'll sort out and hope that the federal government, of course, abides by whatever decisions are made by the federal judges.
Roy, you mentioned a constitutional crisis, and we're not there yet. We heard Governor Newsom saying, the Constitution sets forth limits, there are constraints. This was a big victory for democracy and for those 40 million of us living in California. But it certainly by no means is over yet.
No, it isn't. But the anxiety level is so high. I have to tell you, not to get too personal, but some of my best friends are folks from Argentina. And when they talk to me about what's been happening in the last few months, they say that we've seen this movie before. We've seen people who disappear. We've seen the government slip toward fascism, and they're convinced that's where we're headed. But the other side of the coin is there are a lot of sincere Americans who feel that we've got a serious problem with crime in this country, and we've been too soft on it in the past. And so you've got the two diametrically opposed views among the population. Again, let's just hope everybody can get behind whatever the federal judiciary decides, because that's the way the Constitution says the system should work. Checks and balances, balance of powers. And if the courts say you got to do something, you don't ignore that. You have to follow the rules.
All right. We certainly hope that's what we see. Royal Oaks, we so appreciate your insight. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You bet.
Thank you, Royal. And we should tell you that the NBC4 News at 7 begins right now.
You're watching NBC4 News at 7 with breaking news.
And we are following that breaking news. A federal judge has ruled the Trump administration exceeded their authority when they federalized the California National Guard, and that the administration must return control of the Guard to Governor Newsom. The administration did just appeal the order to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and Judge Charles Breyer had issued a stay on his own order until noon tomorrow, leaving time for the president to do just that with the appeal. We just brought you live the governor reacting to that ruling, calling it a good day for democracy.
He also reacted to that confrontation between Secret Service and Senator Alex Padilla. NBC4's Conan Nolan's in our newsroom. He has much more on all of this. Conan.
That's right. The governor going on to say today's order makes clear that President Trump is not above the constitutional restraints. The president is a constitutional officer. He works under the Constitution. And keep in mind that Charles Breyer, the judge in this case, U.S. District Court out of San Francisco, saying that the three provisions that Mr. Trump, the president, had used in order to nationalize the California National Guard do not hold up to scrutiny. There's no rebellion against the government taking place. There is no invasion into the United States from a foreign country. And the president is not unable to institute or practice or enforce the laws of the country without having to nationalize the California National Guard. Here's what the governor said moments ago.
It's a federal judge with a federal order. Period, full stop. It's the rule of law. These are the foundational principles of a constitutional democracy. He must work under the constraints as a constitutional officer of the Constitution of the United States of America. That's what this court order demands of the President of the United States. He is not a monarch, he is not a king, and he should stop acting like one.
Now, the governor responding to the news from the San Francisco District Court. By the way, Charles Breyer, an appointee of President Clinton, so you can assume that the Trump administration is going to say that this is a partisan ruling as they're appealing it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The governor also responding to a remarkable incident that happened earlier today in the federal building on Wilshire Boulevard in Westwood, when the senior United States Senator from California was hustled out of a press conference, taken to the floor and handcuffed by federal authorities. It is now emblematic of the confrontation that is taking place between the state of California and the federal government over immigration law. It was a theme repeated during the news conference by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, the hyperbolic demeaning of Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. This while celebrating the largely unwelcome federal response.
We are staying here to liberate this city from the socialist and the burdensome leadership that this governor and that this mayor have placed on this country.
In the audience, U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, who later said he had heard enough.
Do this.
Hands up. Sir, hands up. I'm Senator Alex Padilla.
Padilla told MSNBC that he was simply interrupting Nome with a question when he was hustled out of the room, with federal agents then putting him on the floor where he was temporarily handcuffed.
Kept repeatedly asking themselves, why am I being detained? No answer. Why am I being detained? No answer. They were not communicative until somebody from, I'm sure, Secretary Nome's team figured out I was who I said I was, and finally said, let him go.
How do you characterize what happened?
It's not about me, Conan. It's not about me. Just think, if they can do this to a United States senator who has the audacity to ask a question, just imagine what they're doing to so many people across the country, or can do, feel like they have the license to do to anybody around the country.
After the incident, Padilla then met with the DHS secretary for 15 minutes. Did it clarify anything?
No.
Nome says she did not hear Padilla identify himself and claimed that he had lunged at her, but that their meeting went well.
I wish that he would have reached out and identified himself and let us know who he was and that he wanted to talk. His approach, was something that I don't think was appropriate at all. But the conversation was great, and we're going to continue to communicate.
The remarkable moment proving to be emblematic of the conflict now underway over unprecedented immigration raids throughout Southern California. Democrats outraged Governor Gavin Newsom moments ago.
And anyone that knows Alex Padilla knows one thing about Alex Padilla. He's one of the most mild-mannered, decent people you'll meet. And that's not, don't just take my word for it. Folks on the other side of the aisle would acknowledge that. I thought it was a disgrace.
That is also the term that was used by Democrats on Capitol Hill, demanding an investigation, certainly an apology. Alex Padilla says he would like one as well. Meanwhile, Homeland Security and the agents in the room said that they did not recognize the senator and that they believed he actually made a move toward the secretary, that they were acting in the best interest of safety for the cabinet official. And once they learned who he was released. I'm Conan Nolan, NBC4 News.
It was a remarkable day, Conan. Meanwhile, Mayor Bass here in Los Angeles held her own news conference about what happened to the senator. Let's get right to NBC4's Robert Kovacic. He was present for that. Robert.
All right, Carolyn, let's go back and talk about that news conference if we can when it comes to the senator. Karen Bass reminding everyone that Alex Padilla is the first Latino senator from the state of California. She thought it was incredible for anyone to believe that they wouldn't recognize him when he walked into that news conference. She said she spoke to the senator to make sure he was okay, to make sure he was uninjured. Then she looked directly into the camera and talked to Kristi Noem and said to the secretary, who she was in Congress with for almost a decade, and she said, Kristi, I don't recognize who you are anymore. But Karen Bass said she does recognize the city of Los Angeles and was surrounded by about 100 community leaders saying this is a city of immigrants and this is a city that does not need not only the federal raids but federal intervention. And so now we are here. It is after 7 o'clock. We are coming upon day 3 of the curfew. And I just want to give you a sense. Remember the idea that the National Guard was coming in here to help because LA was going to be a lawless place. Well, this is the place of lawlessness right now, if you will. This is downtown Los Angeles. You can see members of the LAPD there here just waiting for any type of trouble or any type of protest. We saw a couple of hundred protesters. They were very patient. They didn't really do anything except march around City Hall. They were held signs, they were chanting, they were decrying the ICE raids, but they did not cause any trouble. But you have to consider what we did witness last night. Let's show you some video. We had this live on the NBC4 News at 11 o'clock. There were protesters, and we understand that these were protesters who were involved here at Grant Park about 7:30 last night, who ended up marching about 5 miles all the way to the heart of Koreatown, Western and Beverly. There was an ugly confrontation with police officers. The LAPD putting up a skirmish line. There was foam batons that were fired on the crowd. There were dispersal orders made. And then if you continued on with NBC4 News, There was even a pursuit involving someone who apparently attacked a police officer to some degree. So with that said, we are on night 3 of the curfew. Does the curfew zone, that 1 mile square radius, need to be extended? Does the curfew need to continue? These were the questions we posed to Mayor Bass this afternoon.
Let's talk about the curfew. Is it going to continue? How long is it going to continue? Does the zone need to be expanded after we saw last night in Korea?
Well, I don't think the zone needs to be expanded. Unfortunately, we will continue the curfew, and my hope is after continuing it a few more days that people will get the message that we are serious. The arrest that took place last night was not for looting, was not for violence. It was for unlawful assembly and curfew violation. What I noticed when I was traveling the streets late last night is that the people that were out on the streets were young people waving flags, and they were not violent. That was not the group that has committed the vandalism.
So curfew night 3 is about to get underway, but Carolyn and Kathy, since the ICE raids began a week ago, this is the quietest we have seen downtown Los Angeles. This is the curfew zone that you are looking at right now, and when it gets underway, this is exactly what law enforcement is hoping to see. People off the streets, people that are following the curfew protocol, and that people that will continue to follow the curfew protocol until the mayor decides it is over. But right now it continues starting at 8 o'clock tonight till 6 o'clock in the morning. If there is any trouble, if there is any vandalism, Mayor Bass attributed it to a couple, and I'm quoting here, of bad actors taking full advantage of the federal escalation. We're live here in downtown Los Angeles. I'm Robert Kovacic. Let's go back to you.